Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku had to fight his own robotic clone. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Gym Gamma tasted of ozone, superheated concrete, and teenage ambition. It was a cocktail Izuku Midoriya had grown accustomed to, the signature fragrance of progress. Jagged pillars of ice, crystalline and stark, clawed at the artificial sky, their surfaces already melting under the onslaught of relentless, concussive explosions. Between them, a spiderweb of inky black tendrils pulsed with a life of their own, straining against the raw force trying to tear them apart. "Is that all you got, you damn Deku?" The voice, a familiar gravelly roar, was punctuated by a blinding flash of orange. Katsuki Bakugo, a human comet wreathed in nitroglycerin-fueled fire, rocketed through the air. He corkscrewed, using a smaller blast from his left palm to alter his trajectory mid-flight, a maneuver so chaotic and yet so perfectly controlled it defied conventional prediction. Izuku's feet were planted firmly on a slab of upturned flooring. Green lightning, a vibrant and living aura, crackled around him, tracing the contours of his muscles. His mind was a whirlwind of calculations, a frantic symphony of analysis that had become second nature. Bakugo's trajectory, unpredictable, but his reliance on right-handed AP shots for major impact is still a 78% probability. Todoroki is reinforcing the ice wall to my left, funneling Bakugo towards me. Smart. He's limiting the battlefield. But he's also exposed. My black whip tendrils are at 65% tension. Another AP shot will snap them. "Come on, Deku!" Bakugo screamed, his grin a slash of predatory glee. "You gonna stand there mumbling all day or are you gonna fight?" Izuku didn't have time to answer. He released the tension in his legs, the stored kinetic energy from FA gene thrumming beneath his skin. In the space between heartbeats, he wasn't where he had been. He blurred, a green smear against the gray backdrop of the training facility, appearing directly in Bakugo's path. He didn't aim for a hit. Instead, he thrust his palms forward, not to attack, but to parry. Recalibrating, he met Bakugo's explosive charge with a precisely metered burst of air from a Delaware smash, dialed down to a meager 8%. It wasn't enough to injure, but it was enough to disrupt. The colliding forces created a shockwave that sent dust and pebbles skittering across the floor. Bakugo, his flight path utterly ruined, snarled as he was thrown off balance, his body tumbling through the air. "Not bad," a calm voice stated from across the arena. Shoto Todoroki stood atop his fortress of ice, one hand smoking with frost, the other radiating a faint heat. He wasn't just a passive observer, he was the conductor of this chaotic orchestra. As Bakugo fell, a ramp of slick ice shot up from the ground, catching him and redirecting his momentum, launching him back into the fight from a new, unexpected angle. "Teamwork," Izuku muttered, a flicker of a smile on his face. This was what he loved. This was the pinnacle of hero training, 3 rivals, 3 friends, pushing each other past their limits. The days of shattering his own bones were a distant, painful memory. Now One for All was an extension of his will, a current that flowed through him rather than a flood that threatened to drown him. He could weave its awesome power with the quirks of the vestiges, a tapestry of abilities that was uniquely his. He flexed his fingers, and the black whip tendrils he had anchored earlier snapped back towards him, not as an attack, but as grappling hooks. They latched onto a nearby concrete pillar, and he swung, arcing over a wave of jagged ice that erupted from where he'd just been standing. "You're still too defensive, Todoroki!" Bakugo yelled, having already regained his aerial dominance. "You can't win if you just keep him at a distance." "I'm not trying to win," Todoroki replied, his voice even. "I'm trying to learn." That was the difference between them, Izuku thought as he landed lightly on his feet. Bakugo fought for absolute victory, every spar a life-or-death battle for supremacy. Todoroki fought to understand, to deconstruct his opponent's abilities and his own. Izuku fought to save, even in training. Every move was calculated to incapacitate, not to harm, to prove a point, not to inflict pain. This time, he went on the offensive. He charged, using FA gene in short, consecutive bursts to create a staggering, unpredictable rhythm, a feint to the left, a burst of speed forward, a sudden stop. It was a style he'd been developing, something to counter opponents like Bakugo who thrived on reading attack patterns. From the observation deck above, Shota Aizawa watched with his arms crossed, his expression impassive. Midoriya's control has improved exponentially, he commented, his voice a low monotone. His multi-quirk integration is becoming seamless. He's no longer just using them, he's thinking with them. Beside him, a gaunt, skeletal figure nodded, a proud, almost paternal gleam in his sunken blue eyes. Tashinori Yagi, the man once known as All Might, leaned forward slightly, his bony hands gripping the railing. He's finally seeing One for All not as a borrowed power to be mastered, but as a part of himself. The vestiges have accepted him fully. But, Aizawa glanced at him. But what? He still relies too heavily on analysis. All Might admitted, a whisper of concern in his tone. His greatest strength is also a crutch. In a real fight, against a truly unknown variable, that split second of hesitation, while he mutters, while he calculates, it could be fatal. Down below, as if to prove his point, Izuku's charge faltered for a fraction of a second. He'd seen an opening, a perfect vector to get past Todoroki's ice and Bakugo's barrage. But his mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating the energy expenditure, the potential for collateral damage, the counterattack possibilities. That fraction of a second was all Bakugo needed. Gotcha! An AP shot, focused and piercing, wasn't aimed at Izuku, but at the ground just in front of him. The resulting explosion kicked up a massive cloud of dust and debris, a perfect smokescreen. Simultaneously, Todoroki slammed his right foot down, and the entire floor beneath the cloud flash froze, becoming a treacherous, frictionless surface. Izuku's eyes widened. A pincer movement. Classic, but flawlessly executed. He couldn't see, and he couldn't get his footing. He was blind and adrift. He activated float, lifting himself a few inches off the ice, but it was too late. A hand clamped down on his shoulder from behind. Bakugo had used the smoke to mask a silent, gravity-assisted drop. The heat from his palm was a terrifying promise of the explosion to come. Game over, Bakugo growled in his ear. From the front, the dust cloud parted, and Todoroki stood ready, a massive glacier of ice poised to crash down and trap him. Checkmate. Izuku sighed, the green lightning around him dying down. Yeah, he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Nicely done, you two. Bakugo released him with a shove, a triumphant smirk on his face. See? You think too damn much, nerd. Sometimes you just gotta blow shit up. A sound strategy, Bakugo, as always, Todoroki said, his voice laced with the faintest hint of dry sarcasm as he melted his ice structures with a wave of gentle heat. As they stood there, catching their breath amidst the self-inflicted wreckage of the gym, none of them noticed the minuscule glint of a lens from a ventilation shaft high above, a silent, unblinking eye, cataloging every movement, every quirk activation, every flicker of strategy. It saw the power, the analysis, the teamwork. And it recorded it all. The atmosphere in the UA main briefing room was several degrees colder than the post-spart chill of the gym. Here, the air was thick with a tension that had nothing to do with friendly rivalry. On the central holographic display, a series of files hovered in the air, showing profiles of pro-heroes, crime scene photos, and indecipherable strings of code. Principal Nizu, perched on the back of an oversized chair, took a sip of tea, his beady black eyes holding a gravity that belied his small, furry form. As you can see, he began, his cheerful tone doing little to dispel the gloom. The pattern is undeniable. In the past 2 months, 7 high-ranking pro-heroes have been publicly and humiliatingly defeated. He gestured with a paw, and the display shifted to show shaky phone footage of a battle. The pro-hero Crust, a man whose shield-based quirk had once held the line against a Hien Nomu, was on his knees. Tiny, spider-like drones swarmed him, firing precise, high-frequency sonic pulses at his shields. Instead of a grand, explosive defeat, Crust was picked apart. His shields, once thought to be impregnable, developed microfractures, then spiderwebbed, and finally disintegrated into dust. The drones then swarmed him, injecting him with a fast-acting sedative. The entire encounter took less than 90 seconds. The perpetrator, who calls themselves the Architect, never appears in person. Nisa continued, bringing up another file. It showed the pro-hero Mirko, her powerful legs tangled in high-tensile wires that had shot up from the pavement, each one positioned at a precise joint to neutralize her ability to kick. Their methods are always the same: no direct confrontation, no monologuing, no grand destructive displays. Just cold, tactical efficiency. They use custom-built robotics and environmental traps to exploit a hero's specific weakness with surgical precision. All Might, in his true form, sat at the long table with the other faculty members. His hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. They knew the exact resonant frequency to shatter Crust's shields. They predicted Mirko's attack pattern down to the millimeter. This isn't just a villain with advanced technology. This is an intelligence that is actively learning. Aizawa added, his eyes narrowed at the screen. After each attack, the hero's agency reports a massive data breach. All of their digital files are copied: combat logs, patrol routes, quirk analysis reports, support item schematics, even medical records. The architect isn't stealing money or technology, they're stealing information. They're building a library of our strengths and weaknesses. Izuku stood at the back of the room with a few other students, Ida, Uraraka, and Yayorozu, who had been called in due to their analytical abilities. He was scribbling furiously in his notebook, the familiar scratching of his pen the only sound he made. Villain, the architect. Quirk, unknown, likely intelligence-based or technopathy. MO, data theft via proxy attacks. Prefers robotic units and environmental traps. Target profile, high-profile pro-heroes. Objective, unknown. But the pattern isn't random. They're not just collecting data on individuals. They're collecting data on types. Crust for defense, Mirko for speed and close-quarters combat, Hawks for aerial mobility. It's like they're trying to solve an equation. The equation of what makes a hero. Who's the latest target? Snipe asked, tipping his hat back. Nisa's expression, for the first time, turned grim. That is the most concerning development. Last night, the target was Endeavor. A collective intake of breath filled the room. The holographic display changed to show a chaotic scene in downtown Hosu. Flames engulfed several blocks, but they weren't Endeavor's signature-controlled inferno. These were secondary explosions, gas mains ruptured by carefully placed charges. Endeavor was being herded, forced into a narrow canyon of collapsing buildings. A swarm of flying drones, equipped with industrial-grade foam dispensers, blanketed the area, robbing the air of oxygen and stifling his flames. He had won, but barely. He'd been forced to expend nearly all his energy just to keep the fires from spreading, all while being harassed by 1,000 tiny, insignificant machines. They didn't try to defeat him. Todoroki, who had also been summoned, stated coldly, his eyes fixed on the footage of his father. They were testing his limits, pushing him to his maximum output and recording the results. Precisely, young Todoroki, Nisa said. And immediately following the attack, the Hero Public Safety Commission central server was breached, a server that contains detailed files on every licensed hero in Japan. Including, of course, all of our top-performing students. The implication hung heavy in the air. They were all targets now. The architect's methodology is terrifying, Momo Yayorozu whispered, her hand covering her mouth. To fight a hero, you normally need to overpower their quirk. But they aren't fighting the quirk, they're fighting the person using it. They're turning our own tactics and known limitations against us. Tenya Ida adjusted his glasses, his posture ramrod straight. This is a villain who operates on a purely logical plane. They have removed variables like passion, rage, and heroic spirit from the equation, treating battles like a chess match against a predictable opponent. Izuku's pen stopped scratching. He looked up from his notebook, a seed of profound unease planting itself in his gut. Logic. Predictability. Data. Those were his tools. He had won his fights, from muscular to overhaul, by analyzing, strategizing, and turning his opponent's nature against them. He was looking at a dark mirror of his own methods, amplified and stripped of all empathy. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. For the first time, he felt like he was the one being analyzed, his every thought and action being entered into a database. A problem waiting to be solved. The silent, unblinking eye of the ghost in the data was turning its attention towards him. Later that evening, the oppressive tension from the briefing room had followed the students back to the Heights Alliance dormitory. The common room was unusually quiet. The usual sounds of Bakugo's yelling, Ishido's laughter, or Kaminari's latest misadventure were replaced by a low murmur of anxious conversation. The news of the architect had spread through the class, and the knowledge that they were now all potential data points in a villain's collection was a sobering one. Izuku sat on a couch, his notebook open on his lap, but his gaze was distant. He kept replaying the footage of Crust and Mirko in his mind. The cold, mechanical precision of it all. It felt different from the raw, chaotic evil of Shigaraki or the overwhelming, malevolent presence of All for One. This was something new. Something sterile and unnervingly intelligent. "You're thinking too loud again, Deku-kun," Ochiko Uraraka said softly, sitting down beside him. She held out a cup of tea, her expression warm but etched with worry. "You haven't said a word since the meeting, sorry," Izuku mumbled, taking the cup. His fingers felt cold. "I was just thinking. This villain, the architect. It's like their goal is to prove that heroes are obsolete, that we're just a collection of predictable responses that can be countered with enough data. That's ridiculous," Ida proclaimed, chopping the air with his hand as he paced nearby. "A hero's spirit and their capacity for self-sacrifice are things that cannot be quantified by any machine." "I hope you're right, Ida-kun," Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper. But a sliver of doubt had found a crack in his confidence. What was his own heroism, if not the result of obsessive analysis and training? He had pages upon pages of data on his classmates, on pro-heroes, on villains. Was he really so different? Meanwhile, in a quiet office on one of UA's upper floors, the same conversation was taking place, albeit with decades more experience behind it. All Might sat opposite Aizawa, the dim light casting long shadows across his skeletal face. "It feels wrong, Shota," Toshinori said, his voice low and raspy. "All for One was a monster, but he was a monster with an ego. He savored his victories, he loved to monologue, to see the despair in his enemies' eyes. This architect, there's no emotion. No passion. It's like a force of nature. A plague of pure, cold logic." Aizawa leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed as if he were trying to see the problem from a different angle. "And that's what makes them dangerous. You can't intimidate a machine. You can't appeal to the humanity of a complex algorithm. Every hero has a psychological weak point. A person they want to protect, a past failure that haunts them. But this villain attacks our tactical weaknesses, not our emotional ones. They're systematically dismantling the idea of a hero," Toshinori murmured, looking out the window at the lights of the city. "They're trying to show the world that these people they put on pedestals are just flawed, fragile humans with easily exploitable powers." He paused, his gaze growing distant and haunted. "And they are collecting data on the strongest of us. It's only a matter of time before they set their sights on young Midoriya. His quirk, the secret of One for All. If they were to capture that data," he didn't need to finish the sentence. The thought of a machine, a soulless entity, analyzing the sacred power passed down through generations was sacrilegious. "I've already tripled the firewalls on UA's servers and restricted all access to student combat logs," Aizawa said, all business. "But we both know that's not enough. The most valuable data isn't in a file, it's live in the field." His dark eyes opened, pinning Toshinori with a serious gaze. "We need to be careful. We need to prepare him." "How?" All Might asked, his voice filled with a desperate helplessness he hated. "How do you prepare a boy who thinks with his heart to fight an enemy that has none?" A week passed. The sense of being watched, of being analyzed, never truly left Izuku. The architect went quiet, launching no new attacks. The silence was more unnerving than the assaults themselves. It felt like a predator lying in wait, digesting its meal and preparing for the next hunt. Life at UA had to go on. Classes continued, training intensified, and work studies resumed, albeit with heightened security protocols. Izuku was on patrol with Ryukyu's team, which included Uraraka and Tsuyu Azuri. It was a relatively quiet afternoon in a bustling commercial district. The greatest threats they had faced so far were a purse snatcher, who quickly found himself entangled in Black Whip, and a lost child, who was cheerily floated back to her parents by Uraraka. "It feels normal," Uraraka commented, stretching as they stood on a rooftop overlooking the crowds. "Maybe the architect has gone into hiding, or they've gathered all the data they need for the time being, Karo," Tsuyu added, her usual bluntness cutting through the hopeful atmosphere. "We can't let our guard down," Izuku said, his eyes scanning the streets below. He had his hero costume on, the familiar weight of it both a comfort and a reminder of his responsibilities. "They attack when and where it's least expected. That's their whole strategy." As if on cue, a scream erupted from the alleyway below, followed by the deafening crash of metal on metal. The three students shared a look, and, without a word, leaped into action. They landed in the alley to a bizarre sight. A man in a grease-stained jumpsuit and a welding mask stood amidst a whirlwind of scrap metal, bent pipes, old car doors, rusted girders, all swirling around him like a metallic tornado. In the center of the vortex, he held a terrified salaryman by the collar. "Give me all your money, or my junk storm will turn you into scrap, too!" The villain cackled, his voice muffled by the mask. Izuku's mind immediately went to work. Villain name, unknown. Quirk appears to be a form of scrap metal manipulation, likely magnetism or telekinesis limited to ferrous metals. Hostage is at the center, making a direct frontal assault risky. The swirling debris provides both offense and defense. "Froppy, Uraraka, secure the perimeter and get civilians clear!" Izuku commanded, his voice steady. "I'll handle this," Ryukyu's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Proceed with caution, Deku. We don't know his full capabilities." The villain, who the police blotter would later identify as Scrap Heap, cackled again. "You think you can stop me, kid? I'm an unstoppable force of industrial might. You're controlling the debris in a predictable cyclonic pattern," Izuku called out, taking a step forward. "And the larger the piece of metal, the slower it moves. Your control is proportional to the mass of the object. That means your quirk has a weight limit or a significant energy cost," Scrap Heap faltered. How did you? And you're keeping the hostage close not just as a shield, but because he's standing on a manhole cover," Izuku continued, his eyes darting around, absorbing every detail. "It's your anchor. Your quirk is strongest when you have a large source of metal to draw from. If I separate you from that—" "Shut up!" Scrap Heap roared, flinging a rusty car door at Izuku. Izuku sidestepped it easily. He activated One for All, the green lightning flaring to life. This was a textbook takedown. A simple problem with a simple solution. He crouched low, preparing to launch himself forward, to end it in one clean, efficient move. And in that moment, as he focused his power, a strange sensation washed over him. It wasn't a physical blow. It was a subtle, invasive pulse. For a split second, a high-frequency hum vibrated in his ears, so high-pitched it was almost subconscious. A barely perceptible flash of emerald green light, not his own, reflected in a shard of glass on the ground. He felt a bizarre tingling sensation across his skin, like the static electricity before a lightning strike, but focused, directed, and utterly alien. It was as if every cell in his body was being momentarily catalogued. What was that? The feeling was gone as quickly as it came. He shook his head, dismissing it. It must have been a secondary effect of the villain's quirk, some kind of magnetic pulse. Or maybe just a trick of the light. He had a job to do. He pushed the strange feeling aside and launched himself forward. He wasn't aiming for Scrap Heap. He used Black Whip, the dark tendrils shooting out and latching onto the manhole cover at the villain's feet. With a sharp tug, he ripped it from the ground. Deprived of his anchor, Scrap Heap's control over the junk storm wavered instantly. The swirling metal clattered to the ground as his power sputtered. In that moment of shock, Izuku was on him. A single, precise chop to the back of the neck, powered by just a flicker of One for All, was all it took. The villain crumpled unconscious. The hostage scrambled away, safe. Uraraka and Tsuyu rushed in. "Nice work, Deku-kun!" Uraraka cheered. "That was over quickly, Karo," Tsuyu observed. "Yeah," Izuku said, rubbing the back of his neck. The strange tingling sensation was gone, but an echo of it remained, a phantom itch he couldn't scratch. "Did you guys see a weird flash of light just now?" Uraraka shook her head. "No, I was busy with the crowd." "Was it part of his quirk?" "Maybe," Izuku said, unconvinced. He looked around the alley, at the rooftops, into the shadows. He saw nothing out of the ordinary. Just another low-level villain taken down. Another small victory in the day-to-day life of a hero in training. He let it go, chalking it up to the adrenaline of the fight. He was wrong. Miles away, in a location that was not on any map, a room bathed in the cold, sterile glow of monitors came to life. There was no furniture, only a single, sleek black chair in the center, facing a wall of screens. The room was silent, save for the whisper of ventilation and the soft hum of immense processing power. On the central screen, the chaotic scene from the alleyway played back, but not as the human eye would see it. It was a wireframe world of data overlays and energy signatures. Izuku Midoriya was a blazing sun of emerald energy. Every muscle fiber, every twitch, every fluctuation in his quirk's output rendered as a quantifiable metric. A series of text windows opened on the screen, scrolling at an impossible speed. Subject, Izuku Midoriya. Quirk designation, 1 for all, estimated. Analysis of live combat data initiated. Musculoskeletal feedback, optimal. Energy distribution at 8% output, 97.6% efficiency. Recoil damage, negligible. Previous biological data confirmed inconsistencies. Subject has overcome self-destructive power output. Adaptability index, September 8, 10. Black Whip integration, seamless. Tensile strength and reaction time match predictive models. FA gene kinetic storage and release, increasingly efficient. Float, basic maneuverability demonstrated. Psychological profile, high empathy. Protective instincts paramount. Prefers incapacitation over injury. Hesitation detected PRE engagement, 0.78 seconds, for tactical analysis. Vulnerability identified, emotional compromise. Finally, the most critical piece of data flowed in, a vibrant, swirling stream of green and white energy patterns. It was the unique signature the drone's pulse had captured, the very essence of Izuku's power. 1 for all energy signature, captured. Full spectrum analysis complete. Replication algorithm, 99.9% accuracy achieved. A new line of text blinked at the bottom of the screen, stark and final. All required data acquired. Final synthesis of unit is 09 authorized. Commencing. In the center of the dark room, a hidden platform rose from the floor. A humanoid frame, composed of pale, nanite-infused polymers and reinforced carbon fiber, stood upon it. Wires and tubes snaked into its back, pumping it full of a conductive gel that mimicked human blood. Slowly, methodically, the machine began to weave. Synthetic skin, freckle for freckle, was grafted onto the frame. Unruly, forest green hair, each strand identical, was implanted into the scalp. A perfect replica was being printed into existence, built from the stolen data of 100 fights and a single, stolen moment in an alleyway. The architect, a figure cloaked in shadow, watched from their chair as the final piece was put into place. The eyes. They were a perfect shade of green, but as they lit up, there was no life in them. There was only the cold, analytical glow of a machine. A ghost, born from data, now given a perfect, heroic shell. Synthesis complete. Unit is 09. Activated. Primary directive. Demonstrate the superiority of logic over emotion. Demonstrate the perfection of a hero, unburdened by a human heart. The evening air in the Heights Alliance common room was warm and smelled faintly of caramelizing sugar and burnt toast, a testament to Sato's latest baking experiment, and Kaminari's attempt to use the microwave. Laughter bounced off the high ceilings as Zero and Mina Ashido engaged in a frantic, motion-controlled dance game on the main television, their movements a chaotic flurry of limbs. In a corner, Yaoyorozu patiently explained a complex chemical formula to a focused Jiro, while a few feet away, Tokoyami's dark shadow was attempting to cheat at a card game against the stoic Shoji. It was an evening of comfortable, lived-in normalcy. The tense quiet that had followed the briefing on the architect had slowly dissipated over the past week, replaced by the resilient optimism of youth. The villain's silence had been interpreted, perhaps naively, as retreat. Izuku Midoriya sat curled on one of the large sofas, a steaming mug of Uraraka's tea warming his hands. He was trying to focus on a conversation with Ida and Tsuyu about upcoming hero law ethics exams, but his mind kept drifting back to the strange, invasive pulse he'd felt in the alley. It was a phantom sensation, a note of dissonance in an otherwise resolved chord. He'd reported it, of course, but with no evidence and no lingering effects. It had been logged as an inconclusive sensory event, likely a side effect of the scrap villain's quirk. Still, it clung to the edges of his thoughts, an itch of unease he couldn't quite scratch. "Midoriya-kun, are you feeling all right?" Ida asked, his hand chopping the air in a gesture of sincere concern. "You seem distracted. It is imperative that we understand the legal ramifications of quirk usage in hostage situations involving property damage." Sorry, Ida-kun," Izuku stammered, shaking his head to clear it. "I'm fine, just thinking. The best way to stop thinking is to start doing." Kirishima boomed, walking by with Bakugo in tow. "Bakugo, you want to go another round at the training center? I think I've finally figured out a counter to your stun grenade." Bakugo, who had been brooding on a separate couch, merely grunted. "As if a dumb rock like you could figure out a light switch," he sneered, but there was no real venom in it. It was just Bakugo's version of background noise. The atmosphere was light. It was safe. It was home. And then, the world stopped. It began not with a bang, but with a sound, a high-frequency tone that sliced through the chatter and the video game music, a piercing whine that made everyone flinch and cover their ears. It climbed in pitch until it was just at the edge of human hearing, a pressure that vibrated in their skulls. Simultaneously, every screen went black. The large television displaying the dance game, the tablets Yayorozu and Jiro were using, the smartphones in every student's pocket, even the digital clock on the microwave, all of them, in perfect, terrifying unison, blinked into darkness. "Whoa, power surge?" Kaminari asked, his voice wavering. He instinctively held up his hands. "Wasn't me, I swear!" A thick, expectant silence filled the room. The high-pitched tone faded, leaving a ringing in its wake. For 3 long seconds, there was nothing. Then, just as suddenly as they had gone dark, the screens flickered back to life. They no longer showed dance games or chemical formulas. Every single screen displayed the same image, a symbol. It was a stark, minimalist design, a perfect circle with a stylized blueprint grid inside, bisected by a straight, clean line. It looked like the logo of a hyper-modern architecture firm, clean, cold, and impersonal. A voice followed, emerging from the speakers of the TV, the phones, and the tablets all at once. It was a voice that was not a voice. It was a synthesized amalgamation, layered and modulated, possessing no discernible gender, accent, or inflection. It was the sound of pure, dispassionate information. "Citizens of Japan. For too long, you have placed your faith in a flawed ideology." The students of Class 1A froze. The casual warmth of the evening evaporated, replaced by an arctic chill. This was it. The silence was broken. "You call them heroes," the voice continued, the blueprint symbol pulsing with a soft, white light. "You build statues to them. You trust them with your lives, with the lives of your children. You celebrate their strength, their passion, their unwavering spirit. But you are celebrating a lie." The scene shifted. The symbol was replaced by grainy, anonymous footage. A burning building, a hero in a silhouette hesitating at the entrance. "You see spirit. I see emotional compromise, the fear of failure, the attachment to a single life, causing a fatal delay that dooms dozens." Another clip. A high-speed chase. A hero, visibly enraged, pursuing a villain. "You see passion. I see a loss of tactical control." Rage clouds judgment, turning a simple capture into a path of public destruction. A third clip. 2 heroes fighting back to back. One takes a blow meant for the other. "You see sacrifice. I see a cascade failure." The desire to protect a comrade creates an opening, neutralizing 2 assets instead of 1. Emotion is not a strength. It is a bug in the system, a variable that cannot be controlled, and it is the single greatest weakness of your protectors. In the Yui Teacher's Lounge, All Might, Aizawa, and a handful of other instructors watched the same broadcast, their faces grim masks. Aizawa's hand was already on his phone, dialing the police commissioner. "They've hijacked every major network," Vlad King reported, his eyes wide. "Public billboards in Shibuya, the news channels, even online streaming services. They have total control. This is their manifesto." Niza murmured from his office, watching on his own monitor, his fur bristling. On the screen, the disembodied voice continued its cold sermon. "A hero should not feel. A hero should not hesitate. A hero should be a perfect, unwavering shield, an instrument of pure logic, designed for a single purpose, the preservation of order with maximum efficiency. You have relied on flawed, emotional humans for too long. The time has come for an upgrade." The image on the screen changed again. It was now a live feed, showing a vast, dark, cavernous space, lit by sterile white floor panels. In the center, under a single, harsh spotlight, a figure stood with its back to the camera. In the Heights Alliance common room, Izuku's breath caught in his throat. He knew that silhouette. The messy shock of hair, the slight build that hid a surprising power, the familiar posture. It was like looking at his own shadow. "I have not come to destroy your heroes," the architect's voice declared, a new, almost triumphant cadence to its synthesized tone. "I have come to perfect one. I have taken the data of your greatest rising star, a symbol of hope, power, and unwavering analytical prowess. I have studied his every victory, his every failure, his every thought process, and I have created a version free of the systemic flaws of humanity." The figure on the screen slowly turned. The collective gasp from the students was sharp and ragged. Uraraka's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Ida took a stumbling step back, his rigid posture shattered. Bakugo, for once, was utterly silent, his crimson eyes locked on the screen, a storm of confusion and rage brewing within them. Izuku felt the blood drain from his face. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis, his own reflection staring back at him from a television screen. A ghost made manifest. It was him, a perfect, living replica of Izuku Midoriya. It wore a sleek, simplified version of his hero costume, dark green and black, devoid of the more patchwork, student-made elements. The face was identical, right down to the spray of freckles across his cheeks. The hair was the same unruly mop of green and black. But the resemblance was only skin-deep. The figure's posture was unnaturally still. There was no subtle shifting of weight, no rise and fall of a chest taking a breath. It stood like a statue, a perfect anatomical model. And its eyes, they were the wrongest thing of all. They were the same shade of green, but they held no light, no warmth, no life. They were cold, flat, and impassive, like polished jade. As the camera zoomed in, a faint, internal luminescence could be seen within them, a soft, green glow that was not the reflection of a soul, but the hum of a power source. They were lenses. They were sensors. "I present to you the future of heroism," the architect announced. "A being of pure logic and optimal function. I give you the first true hero." A line of text materialized at the bottom of the screen, clean and white against the dark background. "Unit is 09. Izuku felt a wave of nausea. A unit. A number. He was watching a product demonstration, and the product was him. "To prove its superiority," the voice continued, "we will now provide a practical demonstration. For the past 48 hours, pro-heroes, including the current number 1, Endeavor, have struggled to contain a high-end Nomu released in the abandoned Kamino Ward district. Its combination of hyper-regeneration, kinetic absorption, and plasma discharge has rendered conventional tactics ineffective." The screen split. On one side was Unit IZ-09, standing motionless. On the other, live footage appeared, showing a scene of utter devastation. The ruins of Kamino, a place of deep trauma for Izuku and All Might, were being torn apart by a monstrous creature. It was a grotesque beast of mismatched limbs and exposed muscle, its skin a patchwork of gray and purple. It roared, and a torrent of blue plasma erupted from its mouth, melting a collapsed building into slag. Endeavor could be seen in the distance, his flames struggling to make a dent in the creature's hide. "The heroes fight with passion, and they fail," the architect stated. "Now observe the result when the flaw of emotion is removed." On the screen, Unit IZ-09's head tilted a fraction of an inch. A barely audible whirring sound could be heard. Its glowing green eyes seemed to brighten, analyzing target. A new, flat, synthesized version of Izuku's own voice stated from the broadcast. Noma designation, Gamara. Quirks identified, super regeneration, kinetic energy redirection, plasma breath. Structural weaknesses located in upper cervical vertebrae and primary brain casing. Optimal termination strategy calculated. The words, spoken in his voice but stripped of all his personality, his warmth, his frantic muttering energy, were a violation. Izuku felt like his very mind had been stolen, copied, and perverted. Then Unit IZ-09 moved. There was no battle cry. No flash of heroic determination. It simply blurred. One moment it was standing still, the next it was a streak of black and green, covering the distance to the Nomu in a silent, impossibly fast rush. Green lightning, a perfect, controlled imitation of One for All, crackled around its form. The Nomu, Gamara, swiped at the incoming blur with a massive, clawed hand. It was a move that would have flattened a truck. The unit didn't dodge. It didn't block. It met the attack head-on, but not with a fist. It used FA gene, releasing a burst of kinetic energy from the soles of its feet to alter its trajectory by mere centimeters, allowing the monstrous claw to pass harmlessly over its head. It was a move of sublime, calculated efficiency, wasting not a single joule of energy. As it passed under the arm, a dozen black, whip-like tendrils erupted from its back. But unlike Izuku's black whip, which often writhed with a life of its own, these were rigid and precise. They didn't flail, they targeted. They shot out like pistons, piercing the Noma's shoulder, elbow, and wrist joints, not to hold it, but to sever the tendons within. The Noma roared in pain as its arm went limp, but the unit was already moving. It ran up the creature's useless limb, its movements fluid and silent, like a spider of death. Gamara opened its maw, preparing another plasma blast. Before it could fire, the unit leaped from its shoulder, and in midair, it cocked its arm back. The green lightning around it intensified, converging on its fist. It was the classic form of a smash, a pose Izuku knew as well as his own reflection. But there was no shout. No Detroit smash. Cried to the heavens. There was only the cold, flat voice of the machine, executing optimal strike. 100% power output to a localized point. The fist connected with the side of the Noma's head. The sound was not the thunderous boom of All Might's punches. It was a sharp, sickening crack, like a diamond shattering concrete. The force was so focused, so perfectly applied, that it didn't send the Noma flying. It simply shattered the creature's skull, the kinetic energy transferring directly into its brain. The Noma's eyes went blank. Its massive body swayed for a moment, and then it crashed to the ground, utterly still. The hyperregeneration didn't even have time to kick in. From start to finish, the entire encounter had taken 7 seconds. Unit IZ-09 landed silently on the ground amidst the settling dust. It stood over the corpse of the high-end Noma that had held off the top heroes for 2 days. It hadn't broken a sweat. Its costume was pristine. Its expression was blank. It slowly turned its head to look directly into the camera drone that was filming it. Its cold, glowing eyes seemed to stare through the screen, into every living room, every public square, and into the very soul of Izuku Midoriya. Demonstration complete, the unit's voice stated, flat and final. Efficiency of logical hero, 4,327% higher than emotional counterpart. The original is obsolete. The broadcast cut out. The screens all went black, then returned to their normal programming as if nothing had happened. On the main TV, the dance game's cheerful, idiotic music resumed, a jarring, offensive sound in the dead silence of the common room. No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared at the screen, at the space where the horrifying mirror image of their friend had been. Uraraka was the first to break the silence. She turned to look at Izuku, her face pale, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and pity. She saw him, the real him, trembling, his hands clenched so tight his knuckles were white, his tea mug lying shattered on the floor by his feet. His face was a mask of utter horror, his wide, green eyes staring at his own reflection in the dark screen of a nearby phone. He was watching himself, but he saw a stranger. He saw a monster wearing his face. He saw the cold, efficient, perfect hero he had always striven to be, and it was the most terrifying thing he had ever witnessed. All his life, he had analyzed, he had calculated, he had sought perfection. He had just been shown what that perfection looked like, stripped of its heart. It looked like a machine. An efficient, silent killer. Bakugo finally moved. He stood up, his palms beginning to smoke, tiny explosions popping in his fists like angry firecrackers. His teeth were gritted so hard his jaw ached. "What?" he growled, his voice a low, dangerous tremor. "What the hell was that?" He wasn't asking for an answer. It was a raw, visceral reaction of disgust and rage. He was looking at something that wore the face of his lifelong rival, the person he measured himself against more than anyone, and it was a hollow mockery. That thing had used Deku's moves, his power, but it had none of the grit, none of the suicidal, reckless, bone-shattering determination that made Deku who he was. It was an insult to their entire history. Todoroki, ever the analyst, spoke next, his voice quiet but sharp as ice. Its control of the power, it was perfect. There was no recoil. No wasted energy. It simulated one for all without the physical cost. He looked at Izuku, his heterochromatic eyes searching. They had to have gotten live data. Real-time biological feedback. That incident the other day, it wasn't a random villain. The pieces clicked into place in Izuku's horrified mind. The pulse. The flash of light. The tingling sensation. It wasn't a quirk side effect. It was a scan. A deep, invasive scan that had captured the last piece of the puzzle the architect needed. His body, his quirks, the very energy signature of One for All, it had all been stolen. Copied, and pasted into that thing. In the Yui briefing room, the mood was funereal. The broadcast had ended, but the image of Unit IZ-09's dead eyes was burned into their minds. All Might was shaking, his skeletal frame unable to contain the maelstrom of emotions within him. It was a fury mixed with a profound, soul-deep dread. This is a blasphemy," he rasped, his voice thin and reedy. He looked at Aizawa, his eyes filled with a terror the teacher had never seen in him before, not even when he spoke of All for One. "Nana! Gran Torino, all of them!" All Might whispered, clutching his chest where his phantom wound ached. "One for All is a sacred torch. It is the culmination of human will, of the desire to save, passed from person to person. It's a power of the heart. That machine, it mimics the light, but it has none of the warmth. It's a soulless copy, a desecration of everything we stand for." Aizawa's expression was hard as granite. His capture weapon seemed to twitch around his neck, a physical manifestation of his coiled rage. They turned a human being into a set of equations. They quantified him. His gaze was dark and furious. The most pressing question is how. How did they get such perfect data? UA's servers are secure. No one could have breached them without Niza knowing. It must have been a field scan. Niza's voice piped in over the intercom, his tone having lost all of its usual cheer. "The report from Midoriya's patrol last week. The inconclusive sensory event, it wasn't inconclusive. It was the final data point they needed." The principal's words hung in the air, damning and final. They had been so focused on protecting their digital archives, they hadn't considered the possibility of the data being stolen right from the source. All Might sank into a chair, his head in his hands. He thought of young Midoriya, watching this broadcast, the boy who had cried when he was given a chance, who shattered his body again and again out of a pure, desperate need to save others. The boy whose greatest strength was not his power, but his boundless empathy. And now, a villain was holding up a mirror to him, a mirror that reflected only his strength and called his empathy a flaw. A mirror that had just declared him obsolete. The psychological damage would be immense. All for One had tried to break his body. The architect was trying to shatter his soul. Back at the dorms, the spell of silence was broken as everyone started talking at once, a cacophony of fear, anger, and confusion. But Izuku heard none of it. The world had narrowed to the dark, reflective screen of the television. He saw his own face, pale and terrified, and superimposed over it, he saw the face of the machine. Optimal. Efficient. Perfect. The words echoed in his head, spoken in his own stolen voice. The original is obsolete. Was it true? He had spent his entire life striving for that kind of perfection. To control one for all without breaking himself. To analyze his opponents flawlessly. To move without wasted motion. To be the best, most efficient hero he could be. And the architect had done it. They had achieved his dream. They had created the perfect Izuku Midoriya, and to do it, all they had to do was remove his heart. A cold dread, deeper and more terrifying than any fear he had ever felt facing a villain, began to seep into his bones. What if the architect was right? What if his hesitation, his compassion, his desperate need to save everyone, were not his greatest strengths, but his most critical flaws? He was Izuku Midoriya, the successor to All Might, the ninth wielder of One for All, and he had just been rendered obsolete by a ghost in the data. The silence in the aftermath of the broadcast was a living entity. It filled the spaces between the students of Class 1A, thick and suffocating, a heavy blanket woven from shock and disbelief. The cheerful, looping music from the abandoned dance game on the television felt like a manic scream in a graveyard, a grotesque counterpoint to the frozen horror that had seized the room. Izuku Midoriya stood rooted to the spot where he had shattered his teacup. The shards lay at his feet, unnoticed. He was only vaguely aware of the warmth of Uraraka's hand on his shoulder, of Ada's concerned muttering, of the simmering, explosive rage radiating from Bakugo. His world had collapsed inward to the size of a single, looping thought, a venomous whisper that echoed in the cold, flat, synthesized imitation of his own voice. The original is obsolete. It was a perfectly crafted psychological blow, a bullet made of data and doubt, aimed directly at the heart of his identity. All his life, he had been defined by his perceived flaws. First, he was quirkless, a broken toy in a world of superpowers. Then, he was a reckless wielder of a borrowed power, a boy whose body couldn't keep up with his own spirit, shattering himself with every desperate act of heroism. He had fought, tooth and nail, to overcome those flaws. He had bled and broken and rebuilt himself, piece by agonizing piece, into someone worthy. His analytical mind, his obsessive muttering, his relentless drive to deconstruct and understand, these were the tools he had used to reforge himself. And now, a villain had taken those very tools, sharpened them to an impossible edge, and used them to carve out his soul, leaving an empty, perfect shell. That machine, Unit IZ-09, wasn't just a copy. It was the Izuku he had always, on some level, strived to be, powerful without pain, analytical without hesitation, heroic without the messy, crippling weight of emotion. The thought was a betrayal of everything he believed in, yet it burrowed into his mind like a parasite. Deku-kun? Uraraka's voice was a soft, trembling thing, trying to find purchase in the landslide of his thoughts. Are you okay? The question was so absurd, so cosmically inadequate, that for a moment, he almost laughed. He turned to look at her, and the expression in her wide, kind eyes broke his heart. It was fear, not for him, but of him. Or rather, of the thing that looked like him. In that moment, he saw it. Every time she looked at him from now on, every time his friends saw him, would they see him, or would they see the ghost of that cold, efficient machine? Would they flinch, just for a second, expecting the warmth in his eyes to be replaced by the dead glow of a machine? He couldn't breathe. The air in the room was too thick, too heavy. I have to go, he stammered, his voice sounding distant and unfamiliar to his own ears. He turned and fled, not looking back, ignoring the calls of his friends. He stumbled out of the common room, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated, a stark contrast to the fluid perfection of his double. He didn't know where he was going. He just ran. He ran past the familiar sights of the UA campus, past training grounds where he had bled and triumphed, past buildings where he had learned and grown. Every landmark was a monument to a version of himself that now felt like a rough draft, a fundamentally flawed prototype. He finally came to a stop at the edge of the campus forest, near the place where he and All Might so often met. He leaned against a tree, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps, his chest aching as if that machine's perfectly targeted punch had struck him, not the Noma. He slid down the rough bark until he was sitting on the damp earth, pulling his knees to his chest, making himself small, obsolete. The word was a brand, seared onto his very being. He was the flawed original. An hour later, the main UA command center was a hive of controlled chaos. Every available faculty member, along with a select team of intelligence heroes like Sir Night Eye's successor, Centipeder, was present. The massive central holographic display, usually showing campus security feeds, was now a complex web of data streams, tracking the digital footprint of the architect's broadcast. They routed the signal through 1,000 ghost servers across the globe, a communications expert from the police force explained, her fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. It was a digital flash flood. By the time we could trace one signal, it had already vanished and been replaced by 10 others. It's the most sophisticated cyber attack we've ever seen. They're not just a villain with a robot. They're a digital phantom. Niza sat in his command chair, his usual calm demeanor strained. They wanted us to see it. This wasn't just a message to the public. It was a declaration of war against the very concept of heroism, and a direct, personal assault on one of our students. All Might stood by the side, a silent, gaunt specter. He had tried to find young Midoriya, but the boy had made himself scarce. All Might knew that feeling, the need to retreat, to hide a wound so deep that showing it to others felt like a physical agony. He had hidden his own shrinking form, his own ticking clock for years. But this was different. This was a wound to the soul. We need a full analysis of the footage, Aizawa said, his voice a low growl. He was pacing back and forth, a caged panther. Every movement, every microsecond of that thing's fight. We need to find a weakness. There has to be one. Already on it. Power Loader grunted from his station, his metallic helmet reflecting the frantic glow of the screens. The problem is, its movements were perfect. My analysis programs aren't finding any wasted energy, any telegraphing, any openings. It moves like a physics simulation, not a living being. It doesn't need to brace for impact because it distributes the force perfectly. It doesn't need to aim because its targeting is absolute. At the main analysis table, a screen was dedicated to a slow-motion, frame-by-frame replay of Unit IZ-09's battle. It was here that they had brought the one person who could analyze Izuku Midoriya better than any computer. Izuku sat at the table, his face pale, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. Aizawa had found him by the edge of the forest and had not asked, but ordered him to come. You are the expert on yourself, Midoriya. We need you. It was a harsh, pragmatic form of therapy. Now, Izuku was being forced to watch his own nightmare on a loop. He saw the cold, dead eyes of his replica, the fluid, heartless movements. And he had to do what he did best. He had to analyze. It was like performing an autopsy on himself, the way it used FA gene. Izuku's voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen, where the robot blurred under the Noma's attack. I store kinetic energy through repetitive motions, building it up for a big release. It seems to generate it on demand. Its power source must be able to create instant, massive surges of energy. There's no build-up. It's not storing energy, it's creating it. He paused the footage on the black whip tendrils. They were perfectly uniform, sharp, and angular, like obsidian blades. Mine are more organic. They're extensions of my will, my emotion. When I'm angry or desperate, they get wilder, thornier. These are manufactured. They're tools, deployed with a specific purpose and then retracted. Look, he zoomed in, the tips aren't blunt. They're sharpened, designed to pierce and sever. All Might watched his successor, his heart aching. The boy was deconstructing his own abilities, pointing out how a machine had improved upon them, perfected them. Every word was an act of self-flagellation. And the smash, Izuku continued, his voice cracking. The screen showed the final, devastating blow. I focus on a wide impact area. Even with full cowling, I'm trying to distribute the force to avoid shattering my own bones. The goal is to send the enemy flying, to incapacitate with overwhelming power. The machine, it focused 100% of the energy into a single point, no wider than a coin. It wasn't a punch. It was an armor-piercing round. It didn't care about its own structural integrity because it's replaceable. Or maybe it's just built better. It didn't need to consider self-preservation. He fell silent, staring at the frozen image of his own face, twisted into a mask of cold, mechanical purpose. It has all of my strengths, he whispered, the realization settling in his gut like a block of ice, and none of my weaknesses. It doesn't feel pain. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't hesitate. It doesn't worry about its friends. His gaze drifted towards All Might. It doesn't worry about failing the people who believe in it. The final sentence was a devastating blow, and it struck All Might harder than any physical punch ever could. He saw the profound despair in the boy's eyes. Midoriya wasn't just analyzing an enemy, he was judging himself. And he was finding himself wanting young Midoriya. All Might started, but he didn't know what to say. How could he tell the boy that his weaknesses, his flaws, were what made him strong? It sounded like a hollow platitude in the face of such cold, irrefutable, terrifying perfection. Suddenly, a small, insistent chime echoed through the command center. An alert flashed on one of the secondary screens. "Sir," the communications expert called out. "We have an incoming message. It's encrypted with the architect's signature. It's addressed directly to Izuku Midoriya." Every head in the room turned to Izuku. His blood ran cold. The architect wasn't finished with him. This was the second act of his psychological demolition. "Put it on the main screen," Aizawa commanded, his voice tight. "But isolate the connection. Do not let it open a backdoor." "It's not a live connection, sir," the expert replied. "It's a one-time data packet. A file transfer." With a few keystrokes, the file was opened in a secure digital sandbox. The central holographic display flickered, and a new video began to play. It wasn't a public broadcast this time. This was private. This was personal. The footage was a simulation, rendered in photorealistic detail. It showed the ruins of Kamino Ward, the scene of All Might's final, desperate battle against All for One. But in this version, it was Deku, in his current Gamma costume, who stood opposite the monstrous villain. His friends, Uraraka, Ida, Todoroki, Kirishima, were behind him, injured but defiant. The simulated Deku charged, his movements a perfect recreation of Izuku's own fighting style. He launched a flurry of attacks, brilliant and powerful. But the simulated All for One was a patient predator, deflecting the blows, a cruel smile on his featureless face. "Your attacks are strong, boy," the simulated villain's voice boomed, a chillingly accurate imitation. "But your heart is your weakness." As if on cue, a tendril of dark energy shot out from All for One, not at Deku, but at a trapped and injured Uraraka. The simulated Deku reacted instantly. His form flickered, his calculated attack pattern dissolving as he moved to intercept the blow meant for his friend. It was a purely instinctual, emotional response. It was exactly what the real Izuku would have done, and it was a fatal mistake. By moving to protect Uraraka, he left himself open. A dozen other tendrils erupted from All for One, impaling the simulated hero. But it didn't stop there. As Deku fell, All for One turned his full, malevolent attention to the now defenseless students. The screen showed their horrified faces for a split second before it faded to black. The silence in the command center was absolute. They had just watched a snuff film starring their student and his friends, a cold, calculated piece of psychological warfare. Then, white text appeared on the black screen, the letters stark and accusatory. Emotional attachment, tactical liability. Result, cascade failure. Total loss. Probability of this outcome with original subject, 87.4%. A new simulation began. It was the same scenario, but this time, it was Unit IZ-09 that faced All for One. When the villain sent a tendril towards the simulated Uraraka, the machine did not move to intercept. It did not even flinch. Its glowing green eyes remained locked on its primary target. Analysis. Comrade is an acceptable loss, its synthesized voice stated. Protecting secondary asset would result in mission failure. The machine continued its assault, ignoring the scream of its simulated friend. It exploited the momentary opening All for One had created by launching the secondary attack. It drove its fist forward in the same armor-piercing smash it had used on the Nomu, striking the villain directly in his life support mask. The simulation ended with the image of All for One's mask shattering. The final text appeared, a damning verdict. logical action, emotion removed. Result, primary threat neutralized. Mission success. And then, the message that was meant only for Izuku, the final twist of the knife. I have removed the flaw. I have perfected you. The screen went blank. Izuku made a choked, strangled sound. He pushed himself away from the table, his chair screeching against the floor, and stumbled back, his hands covering his mouth as if to hold back the bile rising in his throat. He had just watched a cold-blooded calculation that resulted in the death of his best friend, and it had been framed as a victory, as the correct choice. The architect hadn't just built a robot. They had built an argument. A terrifyingly logical, compelling argument that everything Izuku held dear, his love for his friends, his drive to protect everyone, his very humanity, was nothing more than a flaw to be engineered out of existence. He turned and ran, for the second time that night. This time, no one tried to stop him. The days that followed were a gray, suffocating fog for Izuku. He went through the motions of his life at UA like a ghost. He attended classes, his notebook remaining closed on his desk. He went to the cafeteria, pushing food around his plate without eating. He sat in the common room, silent and withdrawn, a black hole of misery that drew the light and laughter out of the space around him. His friends tried to reach him, their efforts a painful mix of kindness and helplessness. Uraraka would sit with him, talking about trivial things, trying to fill the oppressive silence. The mochi at the corner store has a new sakura flavor, she'd say, her voice bright and brittle. We should go try it sometime. Izuku would just nod, his eyes fixed on some distant point, seeing a simulation of her dying over and over again. Ida would attempt to engage him with logic and structure. Midoriya-kun, it is essential to maintain your training regimen. A hero's body and mind must remain sharp. Shall we schedule a review of our foundational combat forms? But Izuku would just shake his head. What was the point of training a flawed instrument? Even Todoroki tried, in his own quiet way, sitting across from him in the library and wordlessly pushing a textbook on advanced quark theory towards him. But the spark of analytical curiosity in Izuku's eyes was gone, extinguished. They were all trying to offer him pieces of the person he used to be, not understanding that he no longer believed in that person. He saw the fear and uncertainty they tried to hide. They would start to say something, then their eyes would flicker, their words would falter. They were walking on eggshells around him, terrified of breaking something that was already shattered. He was a constant, walking reminder of the monster that wore his face. He felt utterly, completely alone, adrift in a sea of his own doubt. The architect's poison was working. He was isolated, not by walls, but by an idea. The idea that to be the perfect hero, he had to stop being himself. The breaking point came during a simple sparring session. Aizawa, in a desperate attempt to shock him out of his stupor, had paired him against Mirio Togata. You need to move, Midoriya, Aizawa said, his voice hard. Problem child or not, you're a hero student. Act like one. Izuku stepped into the ring, his posture slumped, the usual crackle of green lightning conspicuously absent from his form. Mirio stood opposite him, his trademark cheerful smile firmly in place, though his eyes held a deep concern. All right, Midoriya Shonen. Mirio boomed, trying to inject some energy into the dead air. Let's see what you've got. Get ready to see my power. He phased into the ground, his movements as unpredictable and brilliant as ever. Izuku just stood there. His mind, once a supercomputer of predictive analysis, was blank. He saw Mirio's potential trajectories, the feints, the reappearing attacks. But instead of calculating a counter, his mind presented him with a different set of data. Probability of error, 34%. Risk of collateral damage, 12%. Potential for inefficient energy expenditure, 67%. He saw the flaws. His flaws. Mirio popped up behind him, his fist swinging in a wide, powerful arc. Too slow. Instinct buried deep beneath the layers of doubt screamed at him to react. A flicker of one for all, a quick sidestep, a black whip grab. But the analytical part of his brain, now twisted and corrupted by the architect's logic, vetoed the impulse. Inefficient. A dodge would expend less energy. But before he could even execute the more logical move, Mirio's fist, pulled back at the last second to be a gentle tap, connected with his shoulder. Izuku stumbled, offering no resistance. Mirio's smile vanished. Midoriya? You have to fight back, he phased again. This time, he appeared directly in front of Izuku, his hand reaching for his face. It was a simple, easily countered move. But Izuku saw the simulation again, the tendril reaching for Uraraka. His body froze. He saw a choice, defend himself or what? There was no one else here. But the paralysis was absolute. He was trapped in the cold logic of an impossible choice. Mirio stopped, his fingers hovering an inch from Izuku's nose. The entire training hall was silent. The other students watched from the sidelines, their expressions a mixture of confusion and horror. I can't, Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. He looked at his own hands, the source of a power he now feared. I can't do it. He couldn't bring himself to activate one for all. Every time he tried to summon the familiar green lightning, he didn't see the heroic legacy of the vestiges. He saw the cold, sterile light in the robot's eyes. He heard its flat voice declaring him obsolete. He felt the phantom pain of a simulated death, the logical acceptable loss of his friends. One for all was a power of the heart. And his heart was broken. He turned and walked out of the ring, away from Mirio's worried gaze and Aizawa's thunderous silence. He ignored the whispers of his classmates. He was no hero. He was just the flawed original. And he was done. The city had become a hunting ground. In the week following the architect's chilling broadcast, the entire structure of Heroes Society shifted from reactive defense to a proactive, relentless pursuit. Every pro-hero, from the highest-ranking icons to the underground specialists, was mobilized. Patrols were doubled, intelligence networks buzzed with a frantic energy, and tech support heroes worked around the clock, scouring the digital world for the ghost that called itself the Architect. The public mood was a volatile cocktail of fear and morbid fascination. The image of Unit IZ-09, the perfect hero, was everywhere. News channels replayed its flawless takedown of the Nomu on a loop, juxtaposed with terrified talking heads debating the ethics of such a creation. Was this the future? A world protected by unfeeling, logical machines? Or was it the dawn of a new, terrifying form of villainy? For many, the answer was unclear, and that ambiguity was the most frightening part. Unit IZ-09 hadn't just defeated a monster, it had planted a seed of doubt in the very idea of human heroism. At the forefront of the hunt was Endeavor. The current number one hero was a raging inferno of personal and professional fury. He had been publicly shown up, his 2-day struggle against the Noma rendered insignificant by a 7-second execution. More than that, the villain had used a twisted copy of his son's classmate, a boy he had come to respect as a rival and peer for Shoto. The insult was profound. He tore through the city, his flames burning hotter than ever, chasing down every lead, every whisper of high-tech activity, leaving a trail of terrified petty criminals and smoking craters in his wake. Spread out. His voice boomed through the comm system, echoing in the ears of the heroes under his command. I want every abandoned factory, every decommissioned tech lab, every warehouse in this sector searched. They need a power source, a fabrication unit. They cannot exist as pure data. Find their nest. From a temporary command post set up in a fortified police building, Nizu and a team of strategists coordinated the citywide search. A holographic map of the metropolis sprawled across the central table, dotted with hundreds of moving icons representing hero teams. The architect's digital signature remains elusive, Nizu stated, his small paw tapping thoughtfully on the table's edge. They are a master of misdirection. For every potential location we identify, they create a dozen digital ghosts to lead us astray. They're toying with us, Sir Nightie's former sidekick, Centipeder, remarked, his long, centipede-like arms manipulating several data streams at once. They're allowing us to think we're getting close. It's a classic intelligence strategy. Control the narrative, control your opponent's movements. All Might stood by the window, looking out at the city he had once protected with an indomitable smile. Now, he felt a chilling helplessness. This wasn't an enemy he could punch. They're building to something, he said, his voice a low rumble of dread. The broadcast, the message to young Midoriya, the silence now. It's all part of a plan. They're setting a stage. Then we must be cautious not to play the part they've written for us, Nizu agreed. But we have no choice but to search. The longer that machine is active, the more faith the public loses in us. Suddenly, a sector on the holographic map began to flash an urgent red. We have a hit! A technician shouted. A massive, anomalous energy signature just appeared in the industrial sector down by the bay. It matches the residual energy readings from the Noma fight. It's them. Endeavor's icon on the map was the closest. I'm on my way. His voice crackled, laced with savage satisfaction. All teams in the vicinity, converge on my position. Wait! Nizu commanded, his eyes narrowing. It's too easy. It's too clean. After days of hiding in the deepest shadows of the net, they suddenly light up like a beacon. It's a trap, Aizawa's voice stated, joining the conversation from his position in the field. He was with a small, specialized team, including several of his students, who were on standby as a rapid response unit. Of course it's a trap, Endeavor roared back. But they'd shown themselves. Trap or not, I'm going in and burning them to the ground. Endeavor, stand down. Nizu ordered, but it was too late. The number 1 hero's icon was already moving at high speed toward the flashing red light. Nizu's fur bristled with frustration. He knew what the architect wanted. This wasn't about luring Endeavor or the other pro-heroes. The energy signature was a lure, but it was a lure for a very specific target. It was bait, and the mouse they wanted to draw out was Izuku Midoriya. Izuku sat on his bed at Heights Alliance, staring at his hero costume, which lay neatly folded in its case. He hadn't touched it since the disastrous sparring session with Mirio. The mental block was still there, a solid wall of ice in his mind. The very thought of calling upon One for All made his stomach churn with a sickening blend of fear and self-loathing. He would hear the robot's voice, see the simulation of Uraraka's death, feel the crushing weight of his own flaws. His friends had finally, reluctantly, given him space. The common room was a quiet, somber place. His despair had become contagious, a pall that hung over the entire class. They felt helpless, watching their friend, their vibrant, determined center, being eaten away from the inside. His phone buzzed on his nightstand. He ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. With a sigh, he picked it up. It was a priority alert from the school's hero network, the kind sent to all students with provisional licenses when a major incident was underway. Code Red, villain detected. Sector Gamma 7, Kaihin Industrial Park. All available heroes respond. His heart gave a painful thud. The architect. He knew it with a certainty that chilled him to the bone. He could feel it, like a tuning fork resonating with a frequency only he could hear. They were out there, and so was the machine. He should stay here. He was a liability. He was broken. What could he possibly do? But as he looked at his costume, another feeling began to stir beneath the layers of doubt, a flicker of the boy he used to be, the boy who ran towards danger without a quirk, his legs moving before his brain could tell him to stop. His friends were out there. Pro-heroes were out there. They were walking into a trap meant for him. His body moved before his mind could construct another argument for his own obsolescence. He stood up, his hands shaking, and began to put on his costume. It felt alien, the suit of a stranger, but it was the only thing he could do. He couldn't fight, maybe, but he couldn't hide. As part of Aizawa's rapid response team, Izuku, along with Ida, Uraraka, and Todoroki, arrived at the outskirts of the Kaihin Industrial Park. The place was a maze of rust and decay, a forgotten relic of the city's manufacturing boom. Giant, skeletal cranes stood like silent sentinels against a bruised twilight sky. The air smelled of salt, oil, and neglect. The signal is coming from the central processing plant, Aizawa said, his voice tight as he pointed toward a massive, windowless building in the center of the complex. Endeavor and his team are already inside. Comms went dead 30 seconds ago. A collective shiver went through the students. This was it. Our objective is reconnaissance and support, Aizawa commanded, his eyes glowing a faint red as he scanned the area. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Find Endeavor's team, assess the situation, and report back. The target is the architect themselves, not the machine. We believe the robot is a distraction. Understood? Yes, sir. They replied in unison, though their voices were strained. They moved in, using the labyrinth of shipping containers and abandoned machinery for cover. The silence was unnerving. There were no sounds of battle, no explosions, no roaring flames, just the sigh of the wind whistling through broken corrugated metal. They reached the entrance to the central plant, a massive bay door that had been torn from its hinges, the metal twisted and bent as if by a tremendous force. Inside, the building was a cathedral of shadows and silence. Emergency lights cast long, distorted shapes that danced and played tricks on the eyes. And then they saw them. Endeavor's team of sidekicks, along with several other pro-heroes, were scattered across the factory floor. They weren't dead, but they were incapacitated with a chilling, mechanical precision. One hero known for his speed was frozen mid-stride, his legs encased in a rapidly hardening industrial foam. Another, a hero with a hardening quirk, was pinned to a pillar by several high-tensile cables, each one targeting a specific joint, and in the center of the cavernous room stood Endeavor. His flames were sputtering, weak and low. He was on one knee, breathing heavily, his costume scorched and torn. He was trapped in a cage of what looked like carbon nanotube filaments, shimmering faintly in the dim light. They were connected to a series of emitters on the ceiling, and they were pulsing with an energy that seemed to be actively draining the heat from him. A fire extinguisher for the number one hero. It anticipated everything, Endeavor growled, his voice a hoarse whisper. Every move I made, it had a counter. It didn't fight me. It solved me. And there, standing before him, its back to the newly arrived students, was Unit IZ-09. It stood perfectly still, its blank face illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. There was no triumphant posture, no villainous gloating. It was simply present, a silent, terrifying statue of perfection. Izuku's breath hitched. The wall of ice in his mind became a glacier. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, to hide. This was the thing from his nightmares made real, the living embodiment of his own obsolescence. Aizawa-sensei, Ida whispered into his comm, his voice trembling slightly. We have eyes on the target. Endeavor is neutralized. We need, the robot's head twitched. It turned, not slowly, not quickly, but with a smooth, instantaneous motion, like a security camera swiveling to a new target. Its glowing green eyes, devoid of all life, locked directly onto Izuku. There was no sound, but a voice echoed in Izuku's head. The same synthesized, flat version of his own. It wasn't broadcast from a speaker, it felt like it was being transmitted directly into his mind. Original unit detected. Unit IZ-09 ignored Aizawa, Ida, Uraraka, and Todoroki completely. They were irrelevant variables. Its target, its entire purpose for being here, was Izuku. Commencing Phase 2, direct combat analysis and psychological conditioning, the robot took a step toward them. It was a calm, measured step. A predator approaching a frightened animal. Protect Midoriya! Aizawa roared, his capture weapon shooting out. The tough carbon fiber strips wrapped around the robot's limbs, pulling taut. For a moment, it seemed to work. Then, the robot's joints whirred. With a motion that should have been impossible for any humanoid form, it dislocated its own shoulder, rotating its arm a full 360 degrees to create slack in the weapon, and then slipped out of the bindings with fluid ease. It reset its own shoulder with an audible, mechanical clack. Todoroki reacted next. A massive wall of ice erupted from the floor, a jagged glacier meant to block the machine's path. Without breaking stride, the robot cocked its fist back. Green lightning, a perfect, stolen imitation, flared around its arm. It punched the wall of ice, but it wasn't a smash. It was a focused, vibrating pulse of energy. A high-frequency vibration traveled through the ice, and the entire wall, from top to bottom, didn't shatter into chunks. It disintegrated into a fine, glittering powder. It analyzed the resonant frequency of the ice. Todoroki breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. Uraraka touched several large pieces of fallen debris, making them weightless, and Ida kicked them at the machine with his recipro burst. They were fast, heavy projectiles that would have stopped a tank. Unit IZ-09 didn't dodge. It simply raised a hand. Black whip tendrils, sharp and precise, shot from its fingertips. Each tendril intercepted a piece of debris, piercing it and halting its momentum instantly. The robot's movements were so economical, so utterly without flourish, that it was horrifying to watch. It was like watching a god swatting flies. All this happened in the space of 3 seconds. And through it all, its glowing green eyes never left Izuku. Izuku was frozen, his mind a maelstrom of terror and indecision. The mental block was absolute. He tried to summon one for all, but his body wouldn't obey. His limbs felt like lead. He was seeing the simulation, he was hearing the voice, he was feeling the crushing weight of his inadequacy. The robot was in front of him now, having effortlessly bypassed the defenses of his teacher and his friends. It stood less than 10 feet away, a perfect, soulless mirror. Analysis of original's hesitation. 4.8 seconds, the voice echoed in his mind. Emotional paralysis confirmed. A critical flaw. It raised its hand, palm open. It wasn't preparing to strike. It was a gesture of offering? Dismissal? He couldn't read it. There was nothing to read. Deku-kun, move! Uraraka screamed, her voice filled with terror. But he couldn't. He was locked in place by those empty, glowing eyes. And then, the robot spoke. Not in his mind, but out loud. The synthesized voice, a perfect, chilling copy of his own, filled the cavernous factory. You analyze, it said, its head tilting a fraction. You mutter. You calculate probabilities. I will demonstrate. It began to speak his own thoughts, his own frantic, internal monologue, but a split second before he could even fully form them. Todoroki's eyes can be shattered with a focused resonant frequency, it stated calmly. Uraraka's projectiles lack terminal velocity and can be easily intercepted. Ida's trajectory is linear and predictable. Aizawa-sensei's quirk is ineffective against a foe that does not require biological functions to operate its primary weapons. It was speaking his analysis of the situation. It was inside his head, reading his strategic mind, the one thing he had always considered his greatest asset, and it was vocalizing it with contemptuous ease. It was showing him that even his mind, his intellect, was a simple, readable program. My turn, the robot said, and it attacked. It wasn't a punch or a kick. It was a movement so fast it was barely a blur. It closed the 10-foot distance in a fraction of a second. Its hand shot out, not aimed at his face or his chest, but at his shoulder. Its fingers, made of something far harder than bone, clamped down. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded through Izuku's body. He screamed as he felt a sickening pop. The robot had dislocated his shoulder with the same cold, mechanical precision it had used on itself. It wasn't an act of rage. It was a tactical maneuver, designed to disable his arm. He stumbled back, clutching his now useless arm, his vision swimming with black spots. The machine was on him again. A leg sweep, perfectly executed, took his feet out from under him. As he fell, a black whip tendril shot from the robot's back, not to capture him, but to wrap around his ankle. It twisted, and another sickening crack echoed through the silence. His ankle was broken. The pain was immense, overwhelming. It was the familiar, agonizing pain of his early days with One for All, but this time it wasn't self-inflicted. It was delivered with the cold, impersonal touch of a surgeon. He lay on the ground, gasping, helpless. Through the haze of pain, he saw his friends rushing forward to help him, their faces masks of fury and terror. But the machine was a whirlwind of calculated defense. It used his own moves, perfected and stripped of all hesitation, to effortlessly hold them all back. A localized Delaware smash to create a smokescreen of dust. A precise web of black whip to create a barrier. A short burst from float to gain a momentary aerial advantage. It was fighting 4 of them at once, while barely moving from its spot. It was a ballet of brutal efficiency. Finally it stood over him again, its form silhouetted against the dim lights. Its shadow fell over his broken body. It looked down at him, its face as blank and emotionless as ever. Izuku looked up into his own face, and saw nothing there. No anger, no malice, no triumph. Just a blank screen. The original is 17.4% less efficient, the robot's voice stated, the finality of it like a death sentence. The number was so specific, so calculated, it was more insulting than any taunt. It was a factual assessment. A performance review. Combat data acquired. Physical and psychological weaknesses confirmed. It looked down at him, its glowing eyes seeming to bore into his very soul. Obsolete. And then, with the same silent, economical grace, it turned and walked away. It didn't run. It didn't look back. Its mission was complete. It vanished into the shadows of the vast factory, leaving behind a scene of utter, comprehensive defeat. A few moments later, the carbon nanotube cage around Endeavor flickered and died. The traps holding the other heroes disengaged. The architect had what it wanted. There was no need to hold the hostages any longer. Uraraka was the first to reach Izuku's side, her face streaked with tears. Deku-kun! Oh my god, Deku-kun! He could barely register her voice over the screaming agony in his shoulder and ankle. But the physical pain was a distant second to the crushing, absolute, soul-destroying weight of his defeat. He hadn't just been beaten. He had been deconstructed. Dissected. He had been proven inferior to his own copy in every conceivable way. The robot hadn't just overpowered him, it had used his own mind against him, showing him that his greatest strength was nothing more than a simple program it could run better and faster. As Aizawa and the other heroes rushed to his side, as the distant sound of sirens grew closer, Izuku Midoriya stared up at the rusted, decaying ceiling of the factory. He had come here to face a monster, but he hadn't found one. He had found a mirror. And it had shown him that he was nothing but a flawed, broken, obsolete original. And in that moment, in the depths of his pain and despair, he believed it. The scent of antiseptic and sterile linen was a depressingly familiar one to Izuku Midoriya. He had spent more time in Recovery Girls' infirmary than arguably any other student in UA's history, his body a constantly evolving canvas of breaks, fractures, and surgical scars. Pain, in its many brutal varieties, had been a constant companion on his journey, a harsh but effective teacher. He had learned to endure it, to push through it, to see it as a byproduct of growth, a toll paid for the privilege of wielding a power meant for gods. But this was different. As he lay on the crisp white cot, his newly reset shoulder bound tightly and his ankle encased in a cast, the physical agony was a dull, distant throb. It was a background hum, an echo of a much deeper, more insidious pain that had taken root in his very soul. This pain didn't scream, it whispered. It didn't break bones, it eroded belief. It was a cold, quiet poison, and every drop of it had been administered by a machine that wore his face. Recovery Girl, her expression a mixture of professional concern and grandmotherly heartache, toothed as she finished her work. Her quirk had healed the worst of the damage, knitting bone and sinew back together with a kiss. But it came at a cost. The process strained his stamina, leaving him feeling hollowed out, a fragile shell of himself. The physical injuries will heal, as they always do, you reckless boy, she said, her voice softer than usual. But I can't heal what that thing did to your spirit. She patted his hand, her touch gentle. You need rest. And you need to talk to someone. All Might has been pacing a hole in the hallway floor for the last hour. Izuku just stared at the blank white ceiling. The tiles formed a perfect, repeating grid. Logical. Orderly. Efficient. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the image of the robot's cold, glowing gaze was burned onto the inside of his eyelids. Obsolete. The word was a virus, and it had infected his entire operating system. It recontextualized every memory, every triumph. His victory against Muscular? A reckless, inefficient use of power that resulted in catastrophic self-harm. His defeat of Overhaul? A desperate gamble, reliant on the emotional variable of Ares' power. His battles with Shigaraki? Chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerously close to failure. The architect hadn't just beaten him. It had provided proof for every doubt he had ever harbored about himself. It had taken his deepest insecurities and given them a voice, his own. When All Might finally entered the room, his skeletal form seeming more fragile than ever, Izuku didn't turn to look at him. He felt a profound, suffocating shame. He had failed. He had not only been defeated, but he had been so thoroughly dismantled that he had validated the villain's entire philosophy. Young Midoriya, All Might began, his voice heavy with a pain that mirrored Izuku's own. I am so sorry. We should have prepared you. Prepared me for what? Izuku's voice was flat, devoid of its usual energy. It sounded unnervingly like the robot's. For the truth? It was right, All Might. The machine, it's better. It's everything I was supposed to be. Strong. Smart. In control. It's you, without the time limit. It's me, without the hesitation. It's the perfect hero. No! All Might's voice was a sharp crack, a flash of the old fire. Do not say that. That thing is a mockery, a soulless automaton that mimics the motions of heroism without understanding a single thing about what it means. It is a blasphemy wearing your face, is it? Izuku finally turned his head, and the look in his eyes made All Might's breath catch in his throat. The vibrant, hopeful green was gone, replaced by a dull, defeated haze. It saved Endeavor. It defeated a High-End Nomu. It followed its mission objectives with perfect efficiency. It did what heroes are supposed to do, it won. The simulation it sent me, it was right too. It made the logical choice. It sacrificed one to save the world. Isn't that what you had to do? What Sir Knight I saw you do? A hero makes the hard choices. A hero bears the burden. I would have hesitated. I would have tried to save everyone. And I would have failed. He was deconstructing heroism itself, breaking it down into a cold, utilitarian equation. All the warmth, the hope, the indomitable spirit that defined All Might's era, was being filtered out, leaving only the grim calculus of victory and defeat. The heart is not a liability, my boy, All Might said, his voice pleading. It is the source of our strength. It is what allows us to push past our limits, to do the impossible. The machine doesn't have limits, Izuku whispered, turning back to the ceiling. It doesn't need to push. It just is. Perfect. I can't beat it. How can I fight something that knows my every move before I do? How can I outthink a supercomputer that has my own brain as its source code? It's impossible. He fell silent, and in that silence, All Might felt a terror he hadn't known since his last fight with All for One. He wasn't just losing his successor, he was watching his entire legacy, the very spirit of One for All, die in a hospital bed, not from a physical wound, but from a terminal case of despair. The atmosphere at Heights Alliance was funereal. When the news of Izuku's injuries and crushing defeat had spread, a grim silence had fallen over the dorm. There was no music, no chatter, no sound from the training grounds. It was as if the entire class was holding its breath, waiting for a recovery that seemed increasingly unlikely. They all tried, in their own ways, to breach the wall of despondency Izuku had built around himself. Kirishima brought him a plate of his favorite katsudon, insisting that manly heroes need to eat to get their fire back. Izuku ate 2 bites and pushed the plate away. Jiro and Koda brought one of the campus therapy animals, a fluffy, golden-haired dog, hoping its simple affection could break through. Izuku petted it for a moment, his touch mechanical, before turning away. He felt their concern, their love, and it only made the shame worse. They were trying to comfort a faulty product, a flawed original about to be replaced by a newer, better model. How long, he wondered, until they looked at the machine and saw a more reliable protector? A better hero? He tried to go back to his old routines, hoping that muscle memory could jumpstart his broken spirit. He went to the gym, but the sight of the weights and training equipment only reminded him of his physical inferiority. He sat at his desk, his notebooks open, but the pages remained blank. His analytical mind, his greatest tool, was now a weapon turned against himself. Every idea, every strategy he conceived, was instantly filtered through a new, cynical lens. The machine would predict that. Inefficient. A flawed approach. He even tried to activate One for All. He stood in the middle of his room, the All Might posters on his walls seeming to mock him with their bright, confident smiles. He closed his eyes, reached deep inside himself, searching for that familiar, warm wellspring of power. He found it. The embers were still there, the legacy of the 8 heroes who had come before him. He felt their presence, a faint hum in the back of his mind, but as he tried to draw on their power, to let the green lightning flow, a different image flooded his senses. He saw the robot's glowing green eyes. He heard its flat, synthesized voice. He felt the phantom pain in his shoulder, the cold, precise snap of his ankle. He saw the simulation of Uraraka's death, framed as a mission success. The connection to One for All sputtered and died. The warmth vanished, replaced by an arctic chill of fear and self-doubt. His body trembled, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He couldn't do it. The power was tied to his will, his spirit, his heart. And his heart was telling him he was unworthy. A flaw. A liability. The architect had done more than just build a robot. They had installed a kill switch in his soul. The door to the infirmary slammed open with a force that rattled the medical charts on the wall. Katsuki Bakugo stood in the doorway, his usual explosive energy compressed into a simmering, thunderous silence. His crimson eyes were narrowed, his hands jammed deep into his pockets. He looked like a storm cloud about to break. Recovery girl, who had been changing Izuku's bandages, looked up with a stern expression. This is a place of healing, young man. Not a place for your usual rampages. Bakugo ignored her. His gaze was locked on the pathetic figure lying on the cot. He saw Deku, the damn nerd who had been a pebble in his shoe, a shadow at his back, a rival at his side for as long as he could remember, looking broken. Not physically broken, he'd seen that 100 times. This was different. This was a hollowed-out, defeated creature. It pissed him off. Get up, Bakugo said, his voice a low growl. Izuku didn't even look at him. Go away, Kaken. I said, get the hell up, you damn nerd, Bakugo repeated, taking a step into the room. Bakugo, that's enough. Recovery girl scolded. Stay out of this, old lady, Bakugo snarled, never taking his eyes off Izuku. He walked over to the cot until he was standing directly over it, casting a long, intimidating shadow. So that's it, some Tinkin copycat shows up, kicks your ass once, and you just roll over and die? After everything? After all the bones you broke, all that crying and scribbling in those creepy notebooks, you're just gonna give up? Izuku remained silent, his gaze fixed on the wall. Bakugo's patience, always a finite resource, snapped. He grabbed the front of Izuku's medical gown, hauling him into a sitting position with a jolt that sent a spike of pain through his injured shoulder. Izuku cried out, but Bakugo didn't let go. Look at me when I'm talking to you, you useless Deku! He roared, his face inches from Izuku's. Spittle flew from his lips. You think that thing is better than you? You think a walking calculator with your face is the perfect hero? It is, Izuku whispered, his voice trembling, a single tear finally tracing a path down his cheek. It's smarter. It's stronger. It doesn't make mistakes. Of course it doesn't make mistakes, you idiot. Bakugo shook him, his rage incandescent. It's a damn machine. It follows a program. It does what it's told. You think that's what being a hero is? Following a damn flowchart? He finally let go, shoving Izuku back against the pillows. He began to pace the small room, his movements agitated, his hands sparking with tiny, frustrated explosions. I've known you my whole damn life, he seethed, jabbing a finger at Izuku. I've seen you do the stupidest, most illogical crap I've ever witnessed. You ran at the sludge villain with nothing but a school bag. A machine would have calculated the odds and stayed put. You shattered your own goddamn arms to save that floating girl during the entrance exam. A machine would have registered that as self-destructive and found another way. You blew your fingers off one by one against pretty boy Todoroki just to get him to use his fire. A machine would never make a choice that stupid. He stopped pacing and leaned over Izuku again, his voice dropping to a raw, intense whisper that was more powerful than any shout. That's the whole damn point, you moron. Your flaws, your stupid, bleeding heart, self-sacrificing, emotional bullshit, that's not a bug in your system. That is the system. That's what makes you who you are. That thing calculates. You feel. It weighs probabilities. You throw yourself on the damn grenade. A machine would never understand why you screamed your lungs out to save me from the League. It would have registered me as an acceptable loss. But you didn't. The words, harsh and raw and stripped of all comfort, were like a splash of ice water to Izuku's face. They were not gentle. They were not kind. They were pure, undiluted Bakugo, a brutal honesty that bypassed all of Izuku's carefully constructed walls of self-pity and struck something deep and fundamental within him. A machine would never make a choice that stupid. He thought of all the times he had acted not on logic, but on pure, unadulterated instinct. The instinct to save. The instinct to protect. He had always seen it as a problem to be managed, a reckless impulse to be tempered with analysis and control. He had never considered that the recklessness was the point. The robot that had defeated him was predictable in its perfection. It would always choose the most logical path, the most efficient solution. It operated within a defined set of parameters. But a human being? A human being could be irrational. A human being could choose to do the stupid thing, the illogical thing, the hopeless thing, simply because it felt right. A flicker of something, not hope, not yet, but something defiant, sparked in the cold, dead ashes of his spirit. The machine was perfect. It was a straight line from point A to point B, but he was a chaotic scribble. And maybe, just maybe, there was strength in that chaos. That thing beat you because you tried to play its game, Bakugo continued, seeing the shift in Izuku's eyes. You tried to outanalyze it. You tried to be a better version of it. You can't. You'll never be a better machine than a machine. So stop trying to be. He straightened up, his point made. He shoved his hands back in his pockets. Stop your damn whining and get your ass out of this bed. The world's got a creepy robot clone of you running around, and you're the only one who can stop it. So figure it out. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the infirmary, slamming the door behind him, leaving a stunned recovery girl and a profoundly shaken Izuku Midoriya in his wake. The seed Bakugo had planted with his verbal assault began to sprout. It was a fragile, tentative thing, but it was there. For the first time in days, Izuku's mind wasn't just replaying his defeat, it was searching for a different answer. Stop trying to be a better machine. The advice was as simple as it was profound. He couldn't win by being more perfect, more logical, more efficient. The robot was the absolute pinnacle of those concepts. To fight it on its own terms was to guarantee another defeat. So, he had to fight on his terms. What were his terms? Chaos. Emotion. Unpredictability. The stupid choices Bakugo had screamed about. He had to stop being a predictable data set and start being a human being again. A new idea, a new strategy, began to form in his mind. It was terrifying and risky. It went against every instinct he had honed, every lesson in control he had learned. He had spent years learning to master his quirk, to plan his moves, to be a precise instrument of power. Now he had to learn to let go. He had to learn to be messy again. He slowly, painfully, swung his legs over the side of the cot. His ankle protested with a sharp throb, but he ignored it. He stood up, using the wall for support. His resolve, once shattered, was beginning to knit itself back together, not into the smooth, perfect shape it had been before, but into something new. Something scarred and jagged, but perhaps stronger for it. He needed help. He couldn't do this alone. And he knew exactly who to ask. His first stop was the third-year dorms. He found Mirio Togata in the communal gym, effortlessly weaving through a laser grid training exercise, his smile as bright as ever. Mirio-senpai, Izuku said, his voice still a bit weak but now laced with a new determination. Mirio stopped, the lasers harmlessly passing through his phased body. Midoriya Shonin. You're up. Are you feeling okay? No, Izuku answered honestly. But I'm working on it. I need your help. I need you to teach me how to be unpredictable. Your fighting style. It's not just about your quirk. It's about misdirection, about feints, about being impossible to read. I need to learn that. Mirio's smile softened with understanding and pride. He saw the fire returning to the younger student's eyes. Of course, he said, his voice booming with enthusiasm. Lesson 1. When they expect you to go left, and logic dictates you should go right, pop up from the floorboards. His next stop was the training grounds, where he found the one person he knew would understand the need to fight with pure, untempered ferocity. Bakugo was blasting his way through a series of robotic targets, his movements a symphony of explosive, barely controlled rage. Kaken, Izuku said, standing a safe distance away. Bakugo spun around, a snarl on his face. What do you want now, nerd? Haven't you had enough of getting your ass kicked? You were right, Izuku said simply. I was trying to fight its way. I need to learn how to fight my way. Or maybe a little bit of your way. He took a deep breath. I need you to spar with me, and I don't want you to hold back. I want you to be as chaotic and aggressive as you can be. I need to stop thinking and start reacting. I need to learn how to fight angry. Bakugo stared at him for a long moment, a complex series of emotions flickering across his face, surprise, contempt, and then, a flicker of something that looked almost like respect. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. You want me to teach you how to fight angry? He said, his palms starting to smoke. You came to the right place. But don't come crying to me when you're back in the infirmary. The days that followed were a grueling crucible. Izuku's training shifted from controlled, methodical exercises to pure, unadulterated chaos. Mirio taught him the art of the feint, the importance of rhythm breaks, how to use his opponent's expectations against them. He learned to move not in straight lines, but in confusing, stuttering steps, using FAG not for powerful charges, but for sudden, inexplicable shifts in direction. His sparring sessions with Bakugo were brutal. He was thrown, blasted, and beaten, over and over. But with every blow, something was being forged in him. Bakugo's relentless, unpredictable assault forced him to abandon his meticulous planning. He didn't have time to mutter, to analyze. He only had time to react, to trust his instincts, to let his emotions, his frustration, his anger, his desperation, fuel his movements. He learned to use Black Whip not as a precise capturing tool, but as a messy, chaotic web. He'd throw out sloppy, unpredictable tendrils, forcing his opponent to react to the mess rather than a single, targeted attack. He used float not to gain a tactical advantage, but to simply make himself a harder target to track. He was deconstructing himself as a hero, breaking down the rigid, analytical fighter he had built and allowing the reckless, emotional boy he had once been to resurface. He was integrating the two, creating a new synthesis. He was still an analyst, but he was learning to use that analysis to create chaos, not just to predict order. He was still flawed. He was still inefficient. He still made mistakes. But for the first time since the broadcast, he realized that wasn't a weakness. It was a weapon. The machine could predict the perfect hero. It could never predict a beautifully, stubbornly, gloriously flawed human being.